So I take it that when you walk around LA, when you bike around LA, you're always listening. And I want to know, just tell me some of the things you hear around LA that are fascinating to you.
Oh, that's a good question. Language, I think. You know, you're a bike rider too. So the fun thing about riding the bike around LA is get all these musics and conversations. I especially like little kid sounds. The little kid sounds of in different languages is always something that just makes me laugh. You know, I love that. We have a next door neighbor. They're from Guatemala, and there's 3 girls and there's 1 little girl. I think she must be 2 now, and you know you hear her every day. And she's just wonderful. Just that high-pitched kid sound with in Spanish, but with a Guatemalan accent. That's awesome. One of the things I'd love to see, I don't have the new iPhone yet, but it talks to you, right? I wish they would make apps with, you know, various accents and things like that would be awesome. Like to have, you know, like I've said this to friends, it would be cool to have like, you know, Japanese guy learning English who stutters. You know, you could just program that, and that could be your what was it? Cyrus? No, Cirrus?
Siri.
Siri, yeah, their Siri could be that. But anyway, or Jamaican. Can you imagine having a nice older woman Jamaican voice?
How could I resist?
That would be awesome. But yeah, that's one of the nice things about LA. The other, of course, is car noises. Lots of car noises. Around my neighborhood here, especially on Pico Boulevard, there's lots of churches, storefront churches. So there's a lot of storefront church music. Which is, I don't know if that's different from regular church music, but the way it echoes out. Like church music, I always get the sense, you know, big hall, huge ceiling, and then often by the time the congregation starts, the doors usually close, right? The storefront churches, the doors are always open. Oh, yes. And then the sound shotguns out right onto the street. So as you pass by it in your car or on your bike or as you're walking by, it's got a certain cadence to it, you know, that I always like those. They're a lot of fun. And most of these storefront churches, they have, you know, bona fide sound systems and drum sets and stuff. So it's really awesome.
From KCSB in Santa Barbara and Colin Marshall Radio, my name's Colin Marshall. This is the Marketplace of Ideas, and today I'm speaking with Alan Nakagawa, who is a visual artist, a sound artist, an installation artist, a founding member of the Collage Ensemble, member of groups like the Southern California Soundscape Ensemble and Diorama and Otonomiyaki, and he does a lot, and I would do a disservice by describing him more, and we can just get into it. He's also well known as a lover of LA and a writer about the food of LA on his food blog, Cafe Lala. And the sound, the food, all this, the kids, all this stuff, you know, it makes me think of this banner I saw promoting LA at LAX recently with Mayor Villaraigosa's face saying, "Welcome to LA, this city that's a world in itself." And you can think, A, how cheesy, but B, that's the reason I'm here. It sounds like the reason you continue to get inspiration from LA. Would I be correct in saying that?
Yeah, definitely. I've heard from quite a few people, especially people who've lived, you know, in various places around the world, that LA, although there's many cosmopolitans with multi-ethnic populations, LA has this unique kind of food thing where a lot of the foods are authentically of those cultures. And what I mean by that is, you know, if you're making ethnic foods, quote unquote, it's usually kind of Americanized, right? Or it's watered down to the local flavor. But in LA, because you have so many actual immigrants from these communities that build these neighborhoods, and then restaurants pop out in those neighborhoods, and of course those people want that authentic food, that as a person who's coming from the outside, right? In a sense, you get to explore that food and its pretty as close as you can possibly get to the actual food from that country. So LA has that sort of unique, allegedly, it's not like I've gone to every single cosmopolitan to try the immigrant food experience there, but I've heard that, and I really appreciate that. I hope that's true. It sounds like it's true. I've heard it for many years, for many decades now. So it's one of the things that inspired me to start the Cafe Lala blog.
1, 2, 3, 4.
And whether we're talking about the languages or the food or the sort of sounds you hear, I often say to people that it extends beyond the cuisine, because you get the groups from other countries cooking for themselves, but you also get them playing music for their own group and building even the built environment for their own group. And you as an outsider get to sort of travel through it in a way you don't get to anywhere else. I don't want to sound like I'm just totally LA boosting, but it is a fascinating element of the city. I mean, and people, I could understand how somebody might think that isn't good. They might think, well, that makes groups separate. That means there's not a civic body that is LA. Do you know what I mean? I mean, where do you fall on the discussion people have about that, about LA and about the sort of integration or not of the world into the city and how that might affect the experience?
Well, I mean, certainly because of that phenomena I just mentioned, it decentralizes the urban environment in LA. And because that is, in a sense, its fabric, the makeup of its fabric, people go crazy here. It's just not like any other city. There's no center. In fact, there's many centers. You could actually live here for a really long time and only explore the tip of the iceberg. And I have this friend who was born and raised in New Orleans, I believe. He had this magazine called Tokyon Magazine. I don't know if you ever read that. Yeah,
a good interview magazine, by the way.
Yeah, great magazine. I don't think is it around anymore?
It's hard to say.
Hard to say. I haven't seen it in a long time, but Adam Glickman is one of the founders, and he said that LA was the city of many tribes. And I always thought that was pretty spot on. And this other guy, Peter Sellers, not the actor, but the director of new music and
right, is the director of the Ojai Music Festival last year, if I recall. Okay. I was there. I saw his hair.
And he actually ran the LA Arts Festival here for several years. He said the LA is the city of hidden treasures, because unfortunately, because it's not centralized, you could move here and not find any of these jewel-like pockets for a very long time. You have to kind of swim into the stream and then catch the current. And once you catch the current, you're fine. But if you don't catch that current, you could be, riptide into numbness,
And it seems to me that for you, art is the means of exploring LA and of finding these hidden gems. However you want to define art, whether that extends to sound or music or food or installations or experiencing the work of others. Is art the main way in for you to find more about LA?
In a very broad sense, absolutely. Right. Yeah. There's several ways you enter communities, right? One is you get invited in, right? You're brought to that thing. Or and the other one is that you sort of adventure into, you often solo, and you go into that. And those two MOs are how I make art. I collaborate with people, but I also do my own solo projects. I collaborate a lot. For instance, Collage Ensemble, that's a collaborative interdisciplinary arts group. Which I'm ending next year, but so it's sort of petering out. But for almost 3 decades, we were collaborating with. I collaborated with a host of artists in various capacities. The nice thing about that is it's always been by nature a fairly interethnic group. And when we come to the table, when we work on projects, we're always bringing each other's sort of background, not just ethnic, but, social, political, and economical, and just experience, right? That's what diversity is about, bringing everything to the table. You don't want everybody to be the same and bring it to the table. You don't really accomplish anything that way, except, pat each other on the back, I guess.
Right.
But collage has been fairly diverse throughout the years. And because of that, sometimes it fails, it doesn't flourish as well as you would like it to flourish. But that's the beauty of collage. And also when you go by yourself and you solo into things, like when I'm just, in this room, which is a garage basically, and I'm just creating sounds with all those guitar effect pedals in that box there, the ISO cube, that venturing in by yourself is also very important. I'm Asian, so I look Asian, So when I walk into Harold and Bell's, all the African Americans swerve around their table and they're looking at me, because I'm usually the only Asian in there.
You think they'd give you a weirder look or me?
That's a good question.
Neither of us look like we belong there.
Yeah. I mean, they would definitely, we would stand out, right? But the moment you order something or you start talking about it, or, you don't order the normal thing, you order the authentic thing. They appreciate that, and I mean, not to just use soul food analogies, but I've been in so many places like in Inglewood and Compton, and because of
restaurants on the Blue Line, right?
Yeah, and you walk in and they're just not used to seeing people that look like me in those shops. So there's that kind of like, who's this guy? But then you start talking and you ask them questions. Questions like, do you have 7-Up cake? Right? Is the catfish fresh? These kinds of things. How many hot sauces do you have? How many pieces in the oxtail stew?
Right,
then they appreciate that because he goes, oh, he's not just coming out of McDonald's into this place. This guy's knows the food, And I have lots of mentors who do that. So that's that sort of hunger for information and that sort of sincere, love for something, in this case food, but in other cases art, in other cases music or culture or whatever, that's important.
Exploring what's going on inside.
And yes, it's important that the listeners know that we're here in you're calling it a garage is sort of, it doesn't get the point across because there's so much stuff here. Everything you'd want to create any type of music, experimental or otherwise, you want, it's right here. And we're recording in it. Nice because it's pretty soundproof. It looks like, the sound, you get just a live enough sound, I think. But, listening to your work or seeing it, whether it's with Collage Ensemble or otherwise, it's easy to isolate certain themes like the intersections between different cultures, experimentalism, food, the urban environment, and inspiration by the visual arts, even if you're making sound. Tell me, what came into your life first as like an artistic possibility? Was it visual art? Was it food? Was it the city that you grew up in? I mean, what showed up first and made a young Alan Nakagawa think that this was something I can make art with? My
family told me the story of when I was about 3 years old. Maybe I'm two or three, and they can't find me. So my grandparents and my aunts and uncles and mom, and they're running around the whole house area looking for me. And I don't know why I didn't answer them, but I was in back of a sofa drawing, they said. That's where the story ends. So 3-year-old kid drawing in back of the sofa with, pen and paper. But my family was also very into traditional Japanese folk music. In other words, they my 2 aunts studied shamisen. My mom played koto, and they would go to practice, and they would perform periodically. And then my uncle was a jazz, he played trombone and clarinet and piano. And so I have these early memories of music through, my family, watching them practice, watching them perform. They weren't professionals. They just did it. And there's a big, my mom's side of the family is from Hiroshima. There's a huge Hiroshima population in Los Angeles. And so back then, when I was little, I don't think they really have these anymore. There used to be these Hiroshima festivals, in Griffith Park. So I remember going there as a little kid and watching, them perform along with all these other people. By the time I was in kindergarten, it kind of all ended because everyone started getting married and, they stopped playing music and whatnot. Then I continued drawing. I didn't really do any music until I was about 13. It wasn't until I went to Otis, after high school, I went to Otis, that I understood that, I can combine the visual arts and the music together. So I got into performance art and video and did that for a number of years.
And tell me, at Otis, what artists did you hear about that led you down the paths you've gone down since?
Well, I've told this story many times, but I was in this class and they showed this film, and the film, I need to research this, but I think it's 12 American artists. I think that's the name of the film. And the film is basically, these, maybe there could be like 10-minute vignettes of artists like Laurie Anderson and John Cage and Philip Glass and all these kinds of people who I had never heard of, didn't understand what their art was like. And, I was watching this. I got really excited. And I believe that day, or if not the next day, I went to the library at Otis and I met this guy who was the slide librarian. And I asked him, I saw this movie and I'm really interested in this music. I don't really know anything about this music, but I would love to hear more like, John Cage's music. The slide librarian happened to be Brian Maines, who's an established painter, and that was his job. He's a slide librarian at Otis. At one point he goes, "Alan, I never told you this, but that day you came in is etched in my brain because I had been building back then it was cassettes. I had been building this cassette library of experimental music, and you were the first person to ever come in and ask for it." That's what he said.
It was brand new when you were there to inaugurate.
Brand new, yeah. So all these fresh cassettes, I just fell in love because up to that point, I did listen to some experimental jazz, but that was about as far as I got into it. I really didn't know anything about Stravinsky or Schoenberg yet, and it was all, I was coming out of this pop idiom. So the floodgates opened after that.
You're getting into artists like John Cage, you mentioned Laurie Anderson, you're hearing about Namjoon Paik, artists that when they're associated with America, they're associated with New York. Now, you never got the feeling that like, oh man, the action's over there. It's not in L.A. You seem to have come out of that with no less allegiance to L.A. Or what did you feel like then?
At that point, the art was so new to me. It didn't even cross my mind that they were all New York artists. In fact, I'd say at that point, and I'm talking about the early 80s, New York was still, still king. It was still king, and it was kind of all the teachers that we had were all pretty much LA artists, but they were becoming famous in New York, or their work was, they were getting shows in New York. And it wasn't until you get a show in New York that you're actually, you've made it, right? Or Europe. So LA was not as popular as it is today. Today, you know, you can go anywhere in the world, and if it's contemporary art, there's usually somebody from LA in that show. But back then, it wasn't like that so much. It was just starting. So I'm turning 21, and my parents, you know, they want to bring me to Vegas. Like the whole family wants to bring me to Vegas, right? And I don't like Vegas. So I said, like, I really don't want to go to Vegas. And they were, you know, absolutely down about that. That just depressed everybody because I think they were thinking, oh, he's going to be 21, we'll bring him to Vegas, you know. I said, you know, what I would really appreciate if we can all pull our money together, and if you could send me to New York, that would be awesome. Back then, Otis was part of the Parsons, and so there were students coming from Parsons and taking classes for like 6 months at Otis. So I made friends. So I knew I had a free place to stay in New York. So I said, all I need is, you know, some pocket change and a round-trip ticket. And so I went to New York for the first time, and I had a great time, like an amazing time, absolutely priceless. But that feeling that New York was the place to be and that it was exciting, it wasn't there. And remember, I'm talking about the early 90s, right? I mean, early 80s. Yes. So New York is not the New York today. It's you know, the subways are really graffitied and, you know, which it's exciting in a completely different way, right? It absolutely hit me, this idea that, oh, New York is the past and LA is the future. So I think that's the moment where it kind of clicked and I said, oh, how cool that I'm in LA, you know? So I'm going back. So I went back and I just started doing a lot of work. I said, well, let me take advantage of, you know, of being in LA. And there are all these things happening that I wasn't aware of at that moment. But when I came back, it kind of just, the flood, you know, it just opened up.
And it wasn't long after all this that you went to study in Japan, correct?
Yeah, well, after that, I went to UC Irvine. By then, I was really into performance art. We created pieces that were multimedia, you know, and on a shoestring budget, and we were performing here and there. Well, so what happened was my grandmother hated my girlfriend at the time. And so I go over her house one afternoon, and there's a newspaper called the Rafu Shimpo. It's the Japanese sort of community newspaper for Japanese speakers primarily. So she cuts out this little thing, and she goes, I want you to go for this. And it's the Monbusho scholarship, you know. I don't know what it is. I don't want to go to Japan.
At this point, what is Japan to you besides a place that your ancestors came from?
I think that's all it is. I've been asked so many times while I'm growing up by my father and my aunt and my grandparents, would you like to go to Japan? We'll send you, you know, because there's so I have more family there than I have in the United States. Throughout my entire childhood, they're always coming here on vacation, and we're going to Disneyland with them and Vegas, you know, and what have you. So, but I never go there, right? And so periodically I'm being asked by my family, wouldn't you like to go to Japan? And my answer is like, why would I want to go to Japan? I don't want to go to Japan because to me it's just so square. You know, it's like so nerdy, and it's just not. I want to be here. I'm making art. I want to be here. So she's trying to get me out of the U.S. So I break up with this girlfriend with, you know, and she and I are doing a lot of work together, and so I'm thinking like, why would I want to go for that? And she says, promise me you'll just try. And I say, okay, because, you know, you don't say no to your grandparents. So I go for it. And, you know, later I find out that it's an extremely competitive scholarship. It's the Japanese equivalent to the Fulbright, except you go to Japan. It just worked so well, the way I got that thing. And I have a lot to thank artist Hirokazu Kosaka for helping me get that. Because at some point I actually get it, and so many things are happening in my life, in my art, that I actually have the audacity to say, no, thank you. And I actually turned the Mombusho Scholarship down. And, you know, Hirokazu said, you know, can you come over and talk to me? I need to talk to you. So I go over, you know, he's the, now he's the artistic director of the JCCC, the Japanese American Cultural and Community Center. But back then he was I believe the gallery director of the Doizaki Gallery. I think the world of Hirokazu. He's more than a mentor. I mean, he's like, you know, kind of a godfather figure in LA. So I go there and he just says, you know, I understand why you turned it down, but let me, you know, tell you why I think you should reconsider. So anyway, so we had this long conversation, and he convinced me, basically, which I'm sure it's easy to convince, you know, a 22-year-old kid who doesn't really know anything.
Right.
And so I go, and sure enough, we break up. So my grandmother's happy, Hirokazu's happy, and I'm happy because I'm in Japan, and I had such a great time in Japan. Met a lot of artists. I have some friends who are like me. They're Japanese American. They don't speak any Japanese, and you know, they went to Japan and they tried to do a project or whatever. And many people, not everyone, but let's say some people, you know, just treated them like trash because they didn't quite understand that they weren't Japanese, that they are born and raised in the United States and could actually be their first time in Japan. And so the way they were treated was absolutely, you know, demeaning. And so I was warned by several friends that, you know, I had this experience, so, you know, keep your eyes out and, you know, make sure, you know, you don't get messed up. I didn't have any of that. And I think the reason I didn't have any of that is because I went on the Mombusho scholarship, yes. Right? It's quite a different thing to be introduced as, oh, and this is so-and-so, you know, he's here via the Mombusho, so which is the Ministry of Culture and Education. So that's very different than just sort of showing up, I think. So I was spoiled, and I don't think I could go back because I wouldn't have that anymore. So I don't know if I'd be treated like that anymore. But anyway, it was such a blessing. I was so lucky. The other thing about that particular year was up to that point, the Mombusho was getting criticized internationally because, of course, the Mombusho is not just, you know, U.S., Japan. It's the world in Japan. And, you know, they were getting criticized for not giving any cultural majoring MFAs. It was primarily going to science and social science and political science majors, and I lucked out because the year that I went for it, they were looking for artists, you know. So that was pretty lucky. So good timing.
Una tecate. ¿De bote botella? De bote.
We have you growing up in LA, visiting New York. What are your city experiences while you're there in Japan?
Because my Japanese my Japanese speaking abilities were no, I'm actually, really bad. They sent me to Osaka School of Foreign Studies, Osaka Gaikoku Daigaku. And that's where they sent all of us, all the Monbusho scholars who couldn't speak Japanese. And you even had our own international dorm. That was the perfect introduction to Japan because it kind of put a whole sort of preface to why I was there. I was, in a sense, there to represent the United States. Oddly enough, I mean, that's so funny to say that, but that is in a sense true. And but I got to meet all these other people, and from all over the world. And even Cuba, everyone was super cool. We were all kind of around the same age. We were all totally, absolutely invested in what we were studying, so there was nothing unusual about how fanatical we were about. Yeah, but they happened to be about all these diverse things. One of the guys I became friends with, that was the thing. We were there to study Japanese for 6 months, and then we were all going to our individual universities, whatever university we happened to be assigned to, right? One of these guys was explaining to me what he was studying, and he said, yeah, it's, I'm going to work with this guy who is, he said, a CD-ROM? And he goes, yeah, like a CD? I know what a CD is, of course. Okay, we're going to create a CD that you can actually record onto. It's like, how could that be? That must be really expensive. He goes, well, this is... So I remember while he was doing his first... because, we kept in touch with each other. He said, dude, guess who I met today? And I go, who? So-and-so from JVC. I go, you know who that is? I go, no, who is that? He goes, that's the guy who invented VHS tape. And I was like, wow. So everyone was like really into these little, like the top of the top in their field. Now, the reason I was, there was another woman, beautiful woman from India. She was studying with a professor who was on one of the top teams finding a cure to cancer, for instance, So, all these noble things. Mm-hmm. So I was there to study stage design, right? Because I was doing performance art, and I didn't know anything about performing on stage. I didn't know anything about theater, and so I figured, well, I don't really want to become an actor, and but I would like to learn more about how do you work within the theatrical hierarchy. So I figured, well, if I go study stage design, I can actually meet the people in theater. And so maybe that would be good. So that's what I proposed, and that's what they accepted. So that worked out well. So for 6 months, I'm in Osaka. I meet a lot of these experimental artists in Osaka. I actually perform a little bit with them in Osaka, and then they shoot me out to Tokyo. My father's side of the family, who I love, they live in Chiba, Ichikawa, which is east of Tokyo or above Tokyo. And then on the other side of Tokyo is Saitama Ken. And I felt like while I didn't really want to live in Chiba, because I didn't really want to be that close to my family.
Well, who does?
That's just what happens. I'm going through the same thing with my son right now and my daughter. But yeah, so there's that. So I feel like I don't want to be too close. I didn't want to be a burden to them. That was partially the reason why. And I didn't like Tokyo. I liked Tokyo, but I didn't want to live in Tokyo. It was just too claustrophobic for me and too noisy, So I go, I don't. And so I lucked out because I had met this singer-songwriter in L.A. About a year or two before. And I told him, he found out that I got the Monbu show and that I was coming to live in Japan. So we contacted each other, and he said, well, when you're ready to move to Tokyo, call me. So I called him. I said, I'm leaving, Osaka. And he says, great, I'll pick you up at the Shinkansen station or whatever, at, is that Shinjuku? Might be Shinjuku. He picks me up, I'm dragging 2 suitcases, and he has a car. We put it in the car, and we drive off into the countryside of Saitama-ken. He actually has 3 places lined up already, 3 apartments for me. This guy totally took care of me.
That's a real operator.
He's great. And his family just completely embraced me and brought me into their community. And I picked this one place that was a condominium. It was owned by a kimono teacher, and she used it to teach women how to put kimonos on. And so she liked the idea of renting to a guy so that a guy would be there all the time because, of course, she didn't use it all the time, just for classes. So I became the rentee or the caretaker of this condominium. And so what I love about this is before I leave, a friend of mine who is from Tokyo, he's a painter. He goes, Alan, I know it's your first time going to Japan, and I'm sure you have all these images, but let me tell you, it's not anything like what you think it's going to be. People aren't wearing kimonos anymore, there aren't, blah, blah, blah. And so I thought it was funny. Every morning I wake up, there are like, 12 women in kimono. Yeah. Good morning. It's like, wow. I was amazed at that. It was just amazing. But with that is a certain kind of etiquette that they teach as part of kimono, the preparation of learning kimono, and then the mastery of how to put it on and wear it. And it was very conservative. And here I was, I was like this liberal LA guy, so that the teacher and I got into some really great discussions periodically.
And in the settings of LA or of New York or of anywhere you were in Japan, it seems like experimental art became an important part of your life. What did experimentalism mean to you in those different places? Or did it mean different things in different places? Or was it just sort of a constant concept you had in your head about what experimental art was? I mean, how has your idea about what experimentalism is and what it can give you sort of changed from the way you've moved around and the groups you've sort of interacted with?
Well, you mentioned Namjoon Paik, and one of the pieces that I heavily influenced me was Global Groove. I don't know if you ever saw this, but back in the 80s, Namjoon Paik did this television show. It was an actual television show that branched Korea with Los Angeles and New York live. And so it was exactly Global Groove. And actually, I'm talking like 10 years after Global Groove. He actually did it live on network television. And Dick Cavett was like the host in New York.
I've got to see this.
I highly recommend it. It's like an hour long. It's exactly it's Namjoon Paik doing Global Groove Live, basically, is what it is. And there are all these great. There's like a Korean shaman performing, and I think Laurie Anderson's doing something, and I remember Lou Reed being on it. It was great. It's like cultural exchange. And maybe this has to do with growing up in LA, but at some point, experimentalism isn't just technology. Because earlier, I think it was for me technology, multimedia, projections and scent, what smells are in the space, the mood and atmosphere of the room. All these things, this sort of like multi-sensorial type experience. And then once I discovered Namjoon Paik, especially when I saw that show, I think I started to realize, all these students around me at Otis, coming from all parts of the United States and all over the world, this is like kind of exciting. This sort of availability of cultural experiences, that we can all kind of put together and mold into this new thing, right? That sort of kind of bubbling in my mind, and was nothing we all kind of sat down and sort of just said, this is what it is. It was just like talking, and compromising and then negotiating and then collaging things together. And then, oh, wow, look what we created. It's like, oh, none of us could ever have thought of this. This is the product of the five of us working together. And that sort of thing became Collage Ensemble, right? So by the time I get to Japan, multi-ethnicity or inter-ethnicity within the metropolis of LA was kind of flipped upside down, because all of a sudden I was the outsider going into, even though I'm Japanese American, I mean, I'm not Japanese, and I'm going into this place where all these other people are coming from all over the world into this program, and then I'm attempting to make art, but the premise of what I was doing in LA didn't make any sense in Japan. It didn't, what are you talking about? Their parameters and concerns are completely different. I can't do anything about technology either, because at that time they were so much more advanced in technology. The artists were far more advanced than I was, coming from LA. So I got lost. I can't tell you how many projects I started in Tokyo and didn't go anywhere, because I didn't have enough to bring to the table. And so what happened for me was it became less important to create the work in Tokyo and more about where am I now? And where am I now at that moment was in Saitama-ken, in the countryside, And so I started doing more work with where I lived rather than in Tokyo. That friend of mine who got me a place to stay, Shoichi Matsunaga, he was actually, he's a singer-songwriter, and he opened his own bar, and he had a stage there with a PA system, and so we played there every night and attracted a lot of artists. A lot of artists actually lived out in the country, oddly enough, because, it's cheaper to live out in the country than it is in Tokyo. So a lot of artists were there, and they would all come, and we would do these like exhibitions and perform music primarily. Towards the end of my scholarship, my mentor, Numata Kempe, he's a professor of stage design at Japan University. He said, the Monbusho is going to give you a pot of money, so you're supposed to do a project with it. And I said, he said, he was a very wise man, of course, and he said, you could do a performance in Tokyo, because, I think he's assuming that that's what I wanted to do, and he's probably right. And it's like, you could do that, but, it'd be like a drop of water in the ocean. It really wouldn't mean anything, because you should think about doing something different. He says, he says, I think you can, because you do very different art, so you should go think about that. So I thought about it, and at the time I had become friends with this wonderful woman who owned a magazine, culture magazine out in Sayama, and it just so happened that she owned this property in Chichibu, which is the highest elevation mountain region in Saitama-ken. And we went and visited this place, and I asked her, I said, I have these funds that the Monbusho's giving me, and I was wondering if it would be okay if we designed a stage out on your property here. And she said, absolutely, it sounds great. So Numata Kempe designed it, and I coordinated a performance of about 5 different performers. And we rented a bus, and we brought like 60 people up there on that mountain hillside, and it was absolutely beautiful. It's a very simple stage on a hilltop, and you look out, and there's no seats. You have to sit on the grass. That's a hillside, so it's kind of picnicky. And she did have a house there, a little house. So there's restrooms and water and stuff, and people are barbecuing. And we had this performance there, and it was great. And the scene is basically the Chichibu Mountains. It was so awesome. It was awesome. So that was my final project as a student, you know.
Right. And you had this once-in-a-lifetime performance there in Japan, and you know, which brings me to the once every week performances you have going on in this very space where we're sitting, the Ear Meal webcast, which is, no matter where anybody lives in the world, anybody, you know, there's listeners to the show from all over the world, they can tune in and see experimental music performed right here in LA on the webcast.
In this garage.
In this very garage, yeah. And I want to get a sense of what you want to make accessible with the Ear Meal webcast that you direct here every Wednesday.
Oh, well, you know, it's kind of coming full circle from all the questions that you've been asking. And that is, so here I am, you know, I've been doing this art for a number of decades now, but always within the context of Collage Ensemble. And as Collage Ensemble is now in its final steps, you know, it's going to end soon. For the past couple of years, I've gotten these opportunities to perform solo and with new people like Diorama and the Southern California Soundscape Ensemble. Also through my work with Keo Griffith, all these people have introduced me to new friends, you know, friends who are doing the same kind of art, but I haven't really been part of those communities because I've always been, in a sense, self-sustaining within the context of Collage Ensemble, because it's a dynamic group, and it's enough just to keep that going, you know, keep on negotiating that. I'll tell you a story. So when I turned 40, one of my dearest friends, Dana Liston, gave me a birthday party. She basically said, "Alan, what would be your ideal birthday party?" And I said, "Oh, you know, my ideal party would be all my friends who are musicians get together and we jam for hours," which is what we did. A friend of mine, Denise Uehara, was at the party, who I don't know really, really well, but we've since become friends. But at that point, I think we just kind of knew each other. She was nice enough to come to the party, and she said this to me. She says, "Alan, you know, for years I've been wondering, how does this guy do what he does? Like, how because I've never seen you at symposiums. I've never seen you at conventions. You know, there's a whole circuit that a lot of the performance artists, they go through to all these, you know, workshops and things to get gigs, to tour, you know, nationally and internationally. And that's how they sustain themselves, on top of probably teaching gigs and things like that. But I don't, you know, I've never done that because, one, I have a job, full-time job, and then Collage Ensemble has gotten grants, and so we get to do our own little thing. We get to do what we want to do. We don't have to tour or anything like that. The bad part about that is we're not famous. You know, nobody knows who we are, but we managed to continue that for 27 plus years, you know. But when she came to the party, she said, "Now I get it. You don't need the system." It's like there are 140 people at this birthday party. It's like,
right. You might say you've made a lot of, in every area of life. You know, you talk about being an outsider in Japan, being an outsider even in LA, depending on where you go, being an outsider in a world of art that's already outside. I mean, could I say that a lot of your life and career, you know, comes down to being able to get into the outsider position and use it well? Is that what drives part of it? Yeah,
I think, you know, being the coordinator, or, you know, this word always has a bad connotation, especially in Hollywood, but, you know, being the producer, you know, you go into a situation and you find out you have to know what your strengths and weaknesses are. What your weaknesses are, then you have to try and get somebody out to help you with that. And what your strengths are, you try and make those richer. And so I've been constantly put into situations where I just think like, wow, wouldn't it be great to do this? And then the next question, of course, is what would it take to do that, right? And says, oh, okay, well then let's go do that. And so that's kind of how I continually have worked. When I was in grad school, one of my teachers, Judy Baca, she's a muralist. She's actually the co-founder of Spark. She said, what we're teaching here, this was at UC Irvine where I got my master's. She said, what we're teaching here is we want to be able to drop you in a desert with nothing, and you should be able to make art. At that time, what I thought she was saying was in terms of materials, like what materials. No, that's not really what she was saying.
Just sand.
Yeah, not just sand, air, No, what she was thinking, like conceptually, like the essence. As long as you can grab a hold of or play with, there's a lot of play involved. It's got to be fun. Right. Otherwise, what the hell? It's not like I'm not getting rich doing this stuff. Right. Monetarily. But if you could just put you in the situation, any situation, and you can kind of make it happen, that's what we're training you to do.
And in LA, it's almost the polar opposite of the desert. There's almost too much inspiration here, isn't there? There's almost an overload that you have to channel and filter.
Oh, yeah. I think I could see that. I could see that. So you need to be able to focus. So
there's too much good stuff to eat here. You'll get distracted by meals if you're not careful.
Well, luckily you get full, so you have to stop eating until you get full, hungry again. So I think that what makes a person stop making art? Like that's something that is like a haunting reality to me because I've gone to school with so many people, so many wonderful people, and most of them have stopped making art, And I see that with other people who have gone through art training or at one point were actually practicing artists. It's not easy to continue. You have to have a strategy and you have to have some form of support mechanism. And then you have to be hungry, right? So there's the food analogy again.
Yes.
You have to be hungry. See, if you're not hungry, then you aren't going to fight for the food. And then, so you're not going to eat. And so then you will starve, and then you will die. And so I think the death of having the hunger of wanting to make art, not needing to make art, I guess that's better. Like, I'm constantly doing something for the arts. You're thinking, I always have a sketchbook with me. We were talking about field recording. I always have something on me where I could pick up a sound. Like most of the field recordings on my iPod are because I heard something and I, just got it out and started recording because I thought what I was hearing was amazing. Luckily now the technology is there. There's so many amazing things happening constantly. So if I'm not collecting things for art, I'm thinking about art, composing, or trying to solve the problem. Like, God, how do I solve that problem? Most of the time, I think I'm in that mode. It's like, how do I do that? How do I solve that? Or how do I make that happen? Or why is that so important right now?
You're solving these problems here in LA, and for the most part, and these problems are presenting themselves to you here in LA. And this is a city, you quoted yourself earlier as saying, you were saying LA seems like the future. And to me as well it does, except it seems like that now, this is the city you grew up in, and it's the city that I was only recently sort of moved to relocate to and to produce the show to, because it seemed irresistible to me, LA did, especially in the 2010s. And it seems to me, maybe it's just a guess, but that the city is now changing in a way it hasn't been before. And, one element of that would be, say, something as normal sounding as the expansion of the metro with which you're professionally involved, or I don't know. Tell me if I'm right. Am I right about this? The city is in character changing in a different way than it's changed before this decade?
Well, one is there is the downtown centralization. All that money that has gone into downtown in the past 20, 30 years, I guess you can start with Bunker Hill, sort of the wiping out of all of those houses and then the construction of what is now Bunker Hill, and then what is now LA Live, and what is now Gallery Row, and what is now the whole kind of apartment condominium, revitalized old apartment condominiums or apartments. And I mean, there's a life in downtown LA that's extremely vibrant. I don't get a sense of how strong that is. Like, is that going to last for a really long time, or is that pretty fragile? And then somebody explained to me, and I'm not sure if this is 100% true, but it has a little bit to do with the industry in Santa Monica, like the Sonys and the Yahoos and the ESPN. Those are all situated on the west side. And so all of those young kids who were hired for those had to live somewhere. And so they wanted to live in downtown, not, the suburbs of, I don't know.
It's quite a commute.
Yeah. So they decide. So that's why in the past 10 years, I think it's 10 years, the Santa Monica Freeway it gets bottlenecked during rush hour now, where it didn't so much before all of this happened, because a lot of them live over there. Now I'm sure it's starting to change again, but for the past 10 years, that seems to have been the case. Even though a lot of shops have closed, it feels like the vibrancy of downtown LA is intact. So we can say that it's going to be around for at least another 8 years, right? Probably. Because of that centralization, in a sense, it has changed a lot of dynamics in what used to be a decentralized area. It's still multi-centralized. That's probably like an oxymoron, but there's still lots of pockets. Like, for instance, and I'm going to generalize here, people who live in Long Beach, they love Long Beach. They don't really want to come to downtown LA. It's too far. After work, maybe they live in downtown LA. They go home. They're in Long Beach. They love Long Beach. They'd go to Orange County before they go to downtown LA, They don't want to go. Right. They don't want to go to downtown LA. So they're very happy there, I think there's lots of places like that in LA County, right? Where, we live here. We're happy with this. We got everything we need. And we don't need to go to downtown. So there's still that. And that's going to be there for forever, because that's just the way it's been built, Even though it's changing, I think it's changing because you and I live in Koreatown, so we're very close to downtown LA. But if we lived other places like Rancho Cucamonga or someplace like that, I don't think we would feel I'm not sure, but I don't think we would feel the same way. Or Valencia.
Yes, but in the urban environment you navigate, you look at the next 10 years, you look at where you're going to be drawing your inspiration from, and, where the places you're going to be doing your collaborations in, and, the environment your energy is going to come from. What do you think about that immediate future, and whether or not LA is changing? What do you think about the ways you'll be able to use this urban space in say, the next decade?
Well, I don't see it in a geography sense. A geographical sense. I see it much like what Earmeal has afforded me. I wish I could be more concrete about it, but that is to say that I've because of LA Art Stream, Mark Walsh and LA Art Stream, they gave me this opportunity to create Earmeal. I curate this weekly thing, and we're in our second year, and I get to meet everybody. So I'm meeting, 5 generations of experimental musicians in Los Angeles. There's definitely something happening in LA. There's definitely a history of experimental music or sound in LA. And, I think Hans Jalsted would agree with me. He's the guy who does Resbox. And that's also a wonderful kind of a month. That's a monthly. And he has these live concerts over there at the Steve Allen Theater. But because it's a monthly, he hasn't had the opportunity to do as much as what I've been doing. And also I do the oral history after each performance. So I get to talk to each artist for like 2 to 3 hours. Something's happening here. One, we're documenting experimental music in Los Angeles. That's very important because allegedly, I've heard this from everybody who's been on Earmeal, no one's doing that. No one's done that. So we're doing that. But on a personal note, because I get to be there during the performance, with Mark, and then I'm the one who's doing the oral history, interviewing in a sense. It's not really an interview, but I'm like a sponge. I'm getting all this 5 generations of information, and something's happening with me. It's like beyond a PhD program. It's beyond a master's program. There's something is changing in me because I get to meet all of these amazing people, some of them are very young and at the beginning of their careers, and some of them are, the masters, and but they're all these common denominators. Hunger is one that I talked about earlier. Yes. The other is embracing the action of embracing is something that they all have on some level, and
embracing
the moment. People, cultures, art, everything. They're passionate about life. I just feel like meeting one of them each week, for now 2 years, it's done something to me, and it's made me focus more on my work. And it's not a coincidence that Collage Ensemble is ending and on all these things. And so I'm not sure that of which is now Earmeal and my sort of relationship and all that. I'm not sure if I could have done that anywhere else. Like, I think that's a very, very LA thing. The ability, one, to meet all of these people, the ability to produce it on a shoestring budget, I mean, it's not even a shoestring budget, it's like that plastic thing at the end of the shoestring, whatever that, what do you call that, the caplet or whatever it's called. It's like that, and going to the oral history portion of each night, the way they open up to me and the way that they're completely candid about their history and in their lives has been phenomenal, And so, I'm sure you know what that's like.
I certainly understand it.
Yeah.
I feel changed in the same way by my guests as you do with yours.
Yeah. It's an, not to sound over the top or anything, but it is an honor to sit in the same room with another artist and have them share everything about the art, but not the art. All the stuff that nobody else really gets to hear or see. And that can't help but affect you. At some point, all of this stuff will be accessible to the general public. We hope to donate it to an archive so that it's available. But to this day, I'm the only one who's heard all of the oral histories. So my life has changed dramatically in the past 2 years because of that, in the performance.
I've been speaking with Alan Nakagawa. He's a founding member of the Collage Ensemble, the multi-disciplinary arts collective here in LA. He's a member of the Southern California Soundscape Ensemble, a member of Otonomiyaki, of the Department of Real Estate. He directs the Ear Meal webcast every Wednesday, and he runs the food blog Cafe Lala, documenting what you can eat here in LA. Alan, thanks so much for taking the time to come on the show this evening.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
If you'd like to learn more about the many projects of Alan Nakagawa, visit the Collage Ensemble's current website, collagecollage.com. This has been the Marketplace of Ideas, and I've been Colin Marshall. You can find the man who makes our theme music, Ben Althouse, at benalthouse.com. And if you want to keep up on all things MOI, feel free to sign up for the Marketplace of Ideas mailing list. You can sign up easily, unsubscribe easily, whatever you want to do, at colinmarshallradio.com. The instructions are there on the Marketplace of Ideas front page. Also on colinmarshallradio.com, you can download any interview in the history of the Marketplace of Ideas, all available absolutely free as podcasts, or you can do it on iTunes. Subscribe there as well. Open up the iTunes store, search for the Marketplace of Ideas, and there you'll find it. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next time for more cultural conversation of the depth you demand on the Marketplace of Ideas.